Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing so well, and that you're adjusting to the change in season, because wherever you are in the world, you're either experiencing autumn, or I imagine you're experiencing spring. So whatever it is, just get that lovely, refreshing drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. And there's nothing more exciting when it comes to receiving a message in the bottle which tells you that Bigfoot just might happen to be real. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Susan Driscoll was my favourite teacher at school. She was young, pretty, quirky. I was about 11 at the time, but I admit that I had a soppy crush on her, as indeed did most of the boys in my year at school, although no one would have ever cared or dared to admit it. Comparing her to any of the other wishy-washy, insipid, colourless and rather drab teachers who conformed to the status quo so dutifully would have been rather like comparing a piece of hardened cheddar to a delectable piece of melt-in-the-mouth French brie. Susan Driscoll was everything all the other teachers were certainly not. Besides everything else, she was fun, lots of fun, with a fabulously engaging sense of humour. On this occasion it was no exception to that rule, as our class had taken a day trip with Miss Driscoll outside Washington for a spot of meditation. Well, that's what she aptly called it, or a quintessential lesson in the game of life. I'm not sure exactly where this beguiling, enchanting place was, as it was so long ago, and my memory fails me in this regard. Nonetheless, the prepossessing, arresting scenery is indelibly marked on my memory, as well as the congenial ambience of that glorious spring day that shall never ever be forgotten. We impatiently traipsed out of the bus, pushing over each other in haste with a level of heightened enthusiasm, as what young boy wouldn't swap a day out industriously exploring the natural world, as opposed to sitting behind a mediocre desk in a boringly dull classroom, listening to the teacher droning on and on about equations, lulling you to sleep with her mathematical lullabies, or rattling on about the biological process in which a tadpole morphs into a frog, when we would so much rather see it happen in nature than hear about it from a teacher who sounded like mother's hairdryer, really annoying. We were all wearing the standard beige long shorts, long socks and hardy hiking boots, and ambled eagerly through a fragrant sweet-scented flowery meadow, where the wisps of long grass brushed against our legs, tickling the exposed areas on our knees. Flowers in varying shades of pinks, purples, reds, yellows and whites bespeckled the landscape in an array of vibrant, pretty colours, their ethereal, graceful, petalled faces bobbing daintily against the gentle breeze, as though they were dancing, while their bountiful, delicate blooms firmly announced the beginning of spring. Where sailing above us in this mesmerising cobalt ocean were a couple of soaring white-tailed kites, who moved their feathery forms so seamlessly with the wind. It was an exquisitely beautiful day. The breeze whistled through the grass, blowing gently against our faces, while the soft sunshine filtered over the valley in a golden glaze, dappling our shoulders in a blissful, rather pleasant, comfortable warmth. "Not long now, boys," said Mrs. Driscoll, who clearly was well acquainted with the area, as she moved with a purposeful stride, elegantly attired in a stylish pair of navy blue pants and a soft white flowing top that moved against the breeze like a sail. She guided us through a well-marked hiking trail, surrounded by the pyramid verdant shapes of the Douglas fir trees on either side. We walked through this blissful shaded oasis, watching a couple of squirrels racing up a tree, eyeing us curiously through sparkling brown eyes. We also scared off a couple of deer in the process, a mother and her spotted fawn, who decided that hanging around a group of rollicking, irrepressibly exuberant kids was certainly not a good idea. Before long we were seated on some sculptural-looking boulders around the pebbly beach of a silvery stream that sparkled under the morning sun, while fountains of fast-moving, surging water galloped, jetted and bounded over the rocks at a forceful speed, with generous sprays of effervescent white foam caressing its surfaces in lacy waves of white froth. On the rear of the meandering stream was an extensive woodgrove of statuesque, towering, rather willowy-looking Douglas firs that clustered together quite loosely, but to the front of us the stream was amply fringed by a scattering of trees. Behind those trees in the furthest distance, the billowing waves or rippling curls of the mountains could be discerned, rising and falling against the blue horizon with such graceful repose. "Please find somewhere comfortable to sit, boys," said Miss Driscoll, pointing to a myriad of smooth boulders scattered together in clusters on the pebbly beach. "There's so many fabulous places to sit out here on the rocks, and they're so lovely and smooth, so much better than those miserably restrained chairs at school. Now, you're probably wondering why I brought you out here today on this field trip. For one thing, I think it's very important that we should be close to nature when pursuing matters that require reflective thought and insightful consideration, of course. Now, as a teacher, I perceive my job so much more than just teaching you algebra or American history. One day you'll be grown men. I'd like to be able to think that I might have played a tiny part in helping to shape you into the fine young men you will invariably become. Of that I am in no doubt, for indeed every one of you boys has made me exceptionally proud without question, and I don't doubt you will all accomplish your goals in life. When I say that, I'm not just talking about material gain. It's every aspect of your life that's important. Most of you will one day raise children of your own. Others might run corporate empires, who knows? Some entrepreneurial businesses, a myriad of different things. You might be a police diver, a fireman, but whatever you do in life, I want you to do it the very best of your ability. That is very important. If there is anything I can teach you to help you progress on that journey, one thing I will say categorically is the two most important lessons that I can teach you is to fully comprehend how to relate to others in the big wide world, for that is positively the most important skill that you can acquire in life. It is something we can't teach and we don't teach in school, which is really ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. You see, if we cannot accommodate our fellow man with polite, ethical and meaningful social interaction and insightful reasoning, we will never ever amount to anything. If you really want to shine, ensure that you are a person of integrity, discretion, character, and of course discernment. You need to be able to intuitively pick up body language in every given situation, whether you become a sheriff, a chef, a businessman, or even a father. The subject I want to brush upon today is called emotional intelligence. Does anybody know what it means to be emotionally intelligent? One of the boys raised his hands, all too eager, while the others hesitantly followed with half-raised hands, all eager to impress Miss Driscoll. Yes, Morris? It means that you need to be sensitive to the feelings of others. Miss Driscoll looked impressed. Bravo, Morris, bravo. That is very clever of you. You're right. It's about being judicious, empathetic, mindfully aware of how you conduct yourself in sensitive, sometimes delicate situations. It's about being diplomatic, sensitive, tactful. Can anyone give me an example of when it might be appropriate to apply tact to a situation? Yes, Ernest? Well, my mother always asks my dad if her bum looks fat because they go out to dinner parties a lot. She's always worried about the size of her bum. I've seen her viewing it at every single angle. She studies it an awful lot. She watches it to see if it's growing. She tries on lots and lots of clothes, but gets very upset if her bum protrudes. Dad says Mum has a bee in her bonnet about her bum size. He tells her that it doesn't look big, but it really does. If she asks me, I tell her the truth. Dad tells me not to be mean. He says you mustn't tell her the truth or it'll hurt her feelings and then she'll be too upset to go to the dinner party. Your father is right, Ernest. He doesn't want your mum to be sad, so he tells her a white lie to make her feel a lot better. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging lying by any manner of means, but being sparing with the truth is a good idea from time to time. What might be a good idea to be sparing with the truth and not so blatantly honest about? Can anyone else give me a good example? Yes, Hugh? My mum says I'm not to tell my baby sister, Clarissa, that Father Christmas doesn't exist, because she says if Clarissa knew the truth, it would kill the magic for her. Then she would be very, very sad. She gets so excited putting milk and gingerbread cookies out for him by the fireplace. Imagine if she realised he wasn't real. There you go. Excellent example. If Clarissa discovered that Father Christmas wasn't real, it would rob her of her joy. Why should we spoil it for her by telling her he isn't? That would be a very mean thing to do. Clarissa deserves to enjoy her childhood. We're grown up for most of our lives. What's wrong with a little bit of magic? Yes, Robert? You don't tell someone something if it's rude, hurtful or offensive, but sometimes you have to tell even if you risk hurting a person's feelings because it's for the greater good of the person that they know the truth. Like my dad is a doctor. He says he has to tell the obese woman that she's killing herself because she's eating too much. She weighs 1/2 ton and looks like a hippo, and she could be killing herself by just eating too much. In that case, the woman would almost certainly know she's unhealthy, overweight. It's staring her brazenly in the face every time she looks in the mirror. But yes, you're right, Robert. You're right there. It wouldn't do to brush the morbid obesity under the carpet. It would be much wiser to help her address the problem. But with a case like this, there's no need to be unkind about it. We can apply tact and sensitivity to every situation. Do you see what I'm getting at? The kids all dutifully nodded. That's the ultimate rule of emotional intelligence. Sometimes we need to speak out for the greater good. Other times we need to be quiet for the greater good. So some secrets need to stay that way. They need to remain a secret. Now I have a basket of bottles here. If any of you have a secret that you know you cannot tell anyone for the greater good, I want you to write it on this piece of paper and we'll put the message in the bottle. We'll throw it into the water and the current will take it away so that we can share our secret with the fishes, with the universe, and with God. If a person happens to chance upon your bottle, opening it up and reading your message, they're also privy to your secret, but then they don't know you, so your secret is safe in their hands. It could say anything like, I broke my brother's toy train on purpose. I never told him about it because it would upset him. I didn't like my mother's hairstyle, but I knew if I said anything offensive, she would be hurt. I saw the postman kiss my mother on the cheek, but I didn't tell my dad because it would upset him. When I'm older, I want to be an astronaut, but I needn't tell anyone else about it because they would be devastated if I wanted to fly to the moon. Whatever your secret is, you can share it with the universe. As you can imagine, we were all scrambling to get a piece of paper as fast as we could, and eagerly scribbling our messages on the paper. It would seem we had a secret we knew we had to keep forever. And even if we didn't, I think we all liked the idea of putting a message in a bottle. Ostensibly, even Miss Driscoll appeared to have a secret, as she wrote on a note, tucking it into her bottle. It was the most satisfying thing that I've ever done. You have a secret too, Miss Driscoll, I asked. Oh, indeed, she said, smiling at me. I have a secret I need to keep to protect my sister for the greater good, to avoid her getting hurt. How I longed to know what Mrs. Driscoll's secret was. It was thrilling to throw our bottle into the water's edge, to watch the bottle containing our secret floating, bobbing and flying down the stream on its long journey to who knows where. This is where my story takes an exceedingly bizarre twist. It must have been easily over 20 years since that secret releasing of the bottle's event, which by then I'd long since forgotten about and put to the back of my mind. But Miss Driscoll, no, I never forgot her. At the time I was on a camping holiday with my family. We had decided to enjoy a spot of fishing by a stream, when I noticed bobbing up and down in the water a little bottle with a yellow cap. I recognised the bottle immediately as one of the bottles from Miss Driscoll's class on emotional intelligence. This was someone's message in a bottle after 20 long years, but whose? I couldn't imagine. On a private joke to myself, it would have been hilariously funny if it had actually been mine. I secretly hoped it was, as my message had said that I fancied Hattie Hansbridge, who was now my wife, so finding that bottle, showing it to my wife, would have been pretty amazing, and the startling quintessential evidence that I really had fancied her all my life. I grabbed the bottle excitedly. Although it was old and weathered, I could see the dry pink note left inside. I trembled nervously as I twisted open the cap, fishing out the little note. Despite a long journey of 20 years bobbing down waterways, this little bottle had survived it all, against all the odds. I mean, I ask you, what were the chances of that? This was surely a case of serendipity. Right time, right place. I opened the little note, written in a blue biro ballpoint pen, where the words, "Bigfoot is real," stood out.
I was absolutely astonished. I would have been none the wiser as to who had written it, but there was only one person I knew who would put an O above an I in his writing instead of a dot. It was no other than Kevin Keating, who so happened to be one of my best friends when I was at school. Thankfully, all these years later, we were still in touch with each other. I recognised the writing based on his one minor discrepancy. It sent chills down my spine, for I knew it was him. He'd recently sent us a Christmas card, and even my wife Hattie had pointed out the unusual anomaly in his writing. It strikes me as quite arduously painful to be putting O above every I you write, she had exclaimed. Why does he do such an idiosyncratic thing? I also knew that he had never discussed the hairy humanoid creature called Bigfoot before. If he had, I would have almost certainly known about it, because I was in his close-knit circle of friends. Here on this note were the words, Bigfoot is real. I perceived that he could only know this truth had he had an experience with one himself. I knew that now that I was privy to this inside information, at the very least, Kevin should tell me his secret. A week later I was seated at the Wedgwood Broiler on 35th Avenue in Seattle, with its throwback booths from the 60s, along with its retro cocktail lounge. "So what is all this about? You've got me very intrigued," asked Kevin, giving me a big convivial pat on the back as he arrived on the scene. "It's very good to see you, bro. It's been rather too long." I always marvelled that despite everything, he still looked exactly like he did 20 years ago, with his boyish cute face. I, on the other hand, was unrecognisable. I had a full beard, along with an unfortunate receding hairline. He continued, "How are you doing? And how's the wife?" "Couldn't be better," I said, offering him the menu. "Hattie is very well. Sends you her love." "Oh, that's very kind," said Kevin. "Please return the favour to her." "We'll do so." "I've always loved this place," said Kevin, diving through the menu with an eager gusto. "I particularly enjoy their sizzling steaks they have here. They're so tender and succulent. I think I'm going to settle for the 11-ounce Wedgwood cut medium rare, served with plenty of fries and mashed potatoes and salad." I closed my menu, assuring the friendly waitress that I would have the same as my friend, along with a couple of craft beers for the both of us. "What is all this about, bro? You've got me curiously intrigued. A blast from the past is what you were saying. Now, what is that supposed to mean?" "Do you remember Miss Driscoll?" "Whew, how could I ever forget her? Who could forget her?" sighed Kevin. "That teacher. She was something else. Legendary. I always had a dreadful crush on her growing up. I know she was as pretty as a picture, with her strawberry blonde hair, porcelain skin and blue eyes, but it was her sparkling personality, bro. That woman, she was a firework. Better than 4th of July any day of the week. She was so fun, effervescent, vibrantly exciting, eccentric. I will say this, though. That husband of hers was guaranteed never to have a boring, dull day in his life. He was one hell of a lucky man. They don't make them like her. She was a rare jewel." "I agree. One of a kind. Let's not kid." Kevin's face paled. "She hasn't popped her clogs or something, has she? Why are you bringing her up like this all of a sudden?" "Don't look so alarmed. I'm quite sure she's still around. I certainly hope she's not dead. I don't see why she shouldn't still be very much in life." "Do me a favour," I said, passing Kevin a pen and paper. "Please, will you write this down for me? The benefits of living in Seattle outweigh the negatives. Write that down." "What for?" bro asked Kevin. "Why would you want me to write that?" "Just do it." Kevin shook his head and wrote down the sentence, looking at me in surprise as he handed me back the paper. "Happy now?" he asked, raising a quizzical brow. "What in the heck is this all about?" "Just as I thought," I said triumphantly. "See, you always put an O above your I. Why do you do that?" "Everyone asks me that. I know it's odd, but I guess I never really feel the dot is substantial enough. It seems so obscure and insignificant, being only a dot. I wonder what a writing expert would think about that. You want the dot to be seen boldly, don't you? Maybe it means you're confident and assertive. Maybe it means you're honest. in-your-face kind of person who wears their heart on their sleeve and doesn't pack any punches. Come to think of it, that does rather describe you." "I fail to understand what my writing has to do with anything," said Kevin, looking at me with a nonplussed expression on his face. "Where is this going, bro? And what does it have to do with a blast from the past? None of this makes any sense to me." "It has everything to do with a blast from the past," I said, pulling out the yellow-top bottle from my jacket pocket. "Everything. Recognise this by any chance?" The colour drained from Kevin's face as I thrust forward the bottle, along with a pink note saying Bigfoot is real. "Where did you get that?" "That was one of the bottles from Miss Driscoll's class that was thrown into the water. We all threw our own bottles into the water. I remember that very well." I nodded. "You're right, Kevin. Last weekend I found your bottle in a stream close to Glacier National Park. It's your bottle. I recognise the writing. You are the one that wrote this. You wrote Bigfoot is real." "I'll be damned. I'll be bloody damned. You found my bottle. How does that even happen? I bet Miss Driscoll never anticipated this happening to any of us." "Not only that, I found your secret." "It is my note," admitted Kevin, "but—" "Now don't pull a fast one on me, Kevin. I think that in the circumstances, given that I found the note in the bottle, fair's fair. I think I'm perfectly entitled to be privy to your secret. Now how do you know Bigfoot is real? Go on, spill. I'm listening." "Because I've seen one," said Kevin. "That's how I know." "Well, are you going to tell me your story?" The waitress arrived, placing our sizzling steaks in front of us, but we barely noticed her, even though the delicious aromas of the spices would have left most salivating. But I was salivating to know Kevin's secret, the secret he considered so significant that he had placed it into a bottle 20 long years ago. Kevin shrugged. All right, I'll tell you. Only because you found the bottle. But even after all these years, I don't want anyone else to know my story. I've not even told my wife about this. Do you understand?" "Of course, as if I would tell anyone." "Very well, I'll tell you. I think I was about 9 years old at the time. My mother went to visit her doctor. She was struggling to breathe, suffering from what she described as short bursts of feeling as if she was being suffocated, as if someone was putting a bag over her head. My father insisted in attending the appointment with her. He's always been very supportive like that. Besides, he was dreadfully worried about my mother's declining health. Even her skin looked ghostly pale. She would wake up in the middle of the night, literally gasping for breath. In truth, we feared the worst. You know, the cancer word. You see, my mother was an insatiable smoker. Started smoking at about 14 years old, as a form of appetite suppressant. She was terrified of picking up weight. The cigarettes reduced her hunger pangs, but in a short time she was puffing her way through dozens of cigarettes, till she became hopelessly addicted. The good news was the doctors found no trace of cancer in her lungs, but insisted that my mother gave up cigarette smoking. She was wheezing, coughing, sometimes struggling to breathe. Even her voice became hoarse due to her inadequate lung function. The doctor said that if she carried on smoking in this way like a chimney, she wouldn't be around to see her grandchildren one day. That, of course, went down like a lead balloon with her, terrified the living hell out of my father. Of course, my mother put up the usual defensive arguments about people who've lived until they were 100 years old, who smoked like a chimney. You know, that usual denial thing. Of course, she couldn't argue with the evidence. The results of her lung scans were plain to see. They revealed considerable diminished lung capacity, which had decreased her oxygen levels significantly, elevated her blood pressure. My mother was very upset, a broken, distraught woman. She certainly didn't want to die, but the idea of not smoking was a huge bummer for her. She genuinely doubted she had the self-discipline to quit. Believe me, she tried everything. My father took the diagnosis very seriously. He'd rifle through my mother's purse, look through her drawers to make absolutely certain she wasn't hiding any cigarettes from him. You see, my mother had about as much discipline as a bear has over a jar of honey, which means she had none whatsoever. I remember you could have touched the tension in our house at the time with a knife. My mother didn't want to give up smoking, while my father insisted she went cold turkey. Of course, she became belligerent, difficult, moody, grumpy, the quintessential nightmare to live with. It was certainly a tough, tumultuous time for all of the family. "Stop making a mountain out of a molehill, sweetheart," my dad would say to her. "Surely with a little self-discipline you can give up the bloody habit." "You don't understand, Alf," she would complain. "From dawn to dusk, the only thing I think about is cigarettes. It's what I dream of when I go to bed. It's what I think about when I wake up." As you know, we lived in a rural area outside Washington, not far from your place as it happens. Our house was heavily flanked on one side with ponderosa pines. Initially we thought my mother looked a lot better. Her breathing issues seemed to have improved. Her skin became a little pinker. Her grumpiness seemed to have subsided ever so slightly. My mother put it down to taking a few indulgent walks in the woods to enjoy the crisp, fresh air. But I wasn't buying it. I sensed something was amiss. I knew she was up to something. So I followed her into the woods. I knew in my gut she couldn't be trusted. Even at such a young age, I was very sharp, very, very astute. Always been that way. Well, I was quite light-footed as I tiptoed into those woods. She had no idea I was following behind her. She was acting very furtive, looking over her shoulders all the time to check that no one was spying on her. She didn't see me. The woods were very pretty, but my mother barely ever went in there. She'd never been an outdoor kind of adventuress or enthusiast, so to speak, even at the best of times. I suspected she'd found a very convenient hollow in a tree somewhere, where she was keeping her secret stash buried away. I wasn't even remotely surprised when I saw it. She pulled out a box of cigarettes and a lighter. I remember she grabbed a cigarette, lit it, sat on a tree stump. She let out this huge, relieved sigh. "Oh, oh," and then began to breathe in and out, inhaling the smoke. "Oh, oh, that is so good," I heard her say. "So good." It was while my mother began to smoke that I noticed a very solitary, tall, stocky figure standing behind a ponderosa pine, clearly hiding there. To my amazement, this huge, Herculean-sized critter that would make a black bear look very small appeared to be mimicking my mother smoking. It was lifting its sausage-sized fingers, balancing a piece of twig between them, putting the twig to its mouth, and puffing as you do when you smoke a cigarette. The creature was mimicking my mother exactly, so perfectly, in fact, that it was hilarious to watch. I don't honestly know why I wasn't afraid. This thing was big, and when I say big, bro, I'm not exaggerating. I mean big. It was 7 foot tall, 600 pounds, covered from head to toe with long flowing brown hair, with the occasional blonde hair thrown into the mix, which was particularly pronounced on the upper torso, rather like a bib. I could discern the grey skin beneath her hair. There were Pacific areas on her body where it was much more scant, along with ropey definitions of underlying muscles which suggested she was seriously ripped. I knew at once she was female, even before I discerned her breasts, which were very low slung on her chest, rather like 2 large empty sacks. You see, she had that female energy about her, gentle like a doe, which was why I guess I wasn't afraid, along with a congenial aura that was oddly reassuring, comforting even. I'm in no doubt if a young kid got lost in the woods, that female Bigfoot would rescue them. I don't even doubt that for a second. She looked nurturing, protective, intrinsically kind. Her heart-shaped face was feminine, but very human, leathery, dark, shiny, and weathered. But her eyes, they were beautiful. If eyes are the mirror of the soul, bro, this Bigfoot had the soul of an angel. I'm telling you, I've never seen such prepossessing eyes. They glittered with such depth. In truth, I never believed dark eyes could be that beautiful. My mother, of course, continued to smoke, oblivious to the presence of the critter. I could hear my father's voice calling her from the house. She began to panic. She bolted upright from the tree stump where she'd been sitting, almost stumbling in her haste, her face flushed pink with guilt. She wobbled uneasily on her feet, throwing the cigarette to the ground, pressing it under the soles of her shoes as hard as she could, as if she was squashing out an insect. Then she used her shoe to manoeuvre the stub under some leaf litter. Then, dashing to the hole in the tree to retrieve some mouthwash that she had hidden there, she began to slosh away. I think it was blue Listerine. She gargled quickly, spitting out the mouthwash on the ground, blowing on her hand to smell her breath, to see if she could smell any telltale signs of cigarettes. While this was all transpiring, the Bigfoot was copying my mother's movements, from the stubbing out of the cigarettes to the gargling of the mouthwash. I was in such awe of the critter. It could mimic absolutely superbly. I'd never seen anything like it before. My father then entered the woods. "There you are, sweetheart. I've been looking for you everywhere. I thought I'd come and join you for some fresh air." My shamefaced mother looked as delighted to see him as a mouse is to see a tabby cat. She was flustered, abashed, doleful. Her skin flushed, her eyes looked evasively ambiguous. "Oh, how sweet of you," she said with such a flat, crestfallen voice. "You needn't have bothered. I've enjoyed being out here on my own." "Oh, don't be ridiculous," my father said, grabbing her by her hands, squeezing them tightly. "When did you ever enjoy being out on your own? I've been thinking. I should join you on some of these outdoor pursuits of yours. I could do with a little exercise. My waist has been getting a little thick of late." "I'd rather you didn't, dear," piped my mother, her voice sounding rather scratchy. I actually enjoy being in the woods on my own. It's very peaceful out here. Can't you exercise at the gym in Bellevue? I gather it's very good there." "Anyone would think you wanted to get rid of me," my father teased. "I've been meaning to tell you, sweetheart," he said, giving her a big kiss on the cheek. "I'm ever so proud of how you've overcome your cigarette addiction. How you have so ingeniously found other outlets, like walking in the woods to distract yourself. For you are not even taking a puff anymore. It can't be easy. We want you around for a long time. So your sacrifice, sweetheart, means the world to me and the kids. I can't tell you how proud we are of you. I can't underestimate it for a moment." My mother hung her head in shame, looking so guilty, like a kid who'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. After she left the woods holding my father's hands, the hairy creature, which of course I now know was a Bigfoot, sauntered over to the tree where my mother had hidden her secret stash. She pulled out the blue Listerine mouthwash, taking a sip, nearly choking on it in disgust, with an expression of unadulterated, repulsed revulsion on her face. She turned the bottle upside down, to empty the liquid contents out onto the earthen floor. Then she threw the empty plastic bottle on the ground, kicking it with her foot so very hard that it went flying into the air like a frisbee over a vast distance, where it slipped seamlessly into the brush. The creature then examined the box of cigarettes. At first she smelt them, pulled out a single cigarette, placing it into her mouth, which she pretended to puff. She dangled the cigarette in front of her nose, sniffing it curiously, while sampling a corner of it in her mouth, which she found completely unpalatable. She spat it out with a vomitous, appalled look on her face. I watched her in awe. She pulled apart my mother's cigarettes, bit by bit. She enjoyed breaking them up into tiny, tiny pieces until they were like sprinkles of cinnamon spice on the forest floor. The irony is she couldn't figure out what the lighter was, so she just threw it into the brush. I never saw the Bigfoot again, but I must tell you, years later my mother told us that it was thanks to our persistence that she was able to give up smoking. "I knew you were on to me," she said. "I hid my cigarettes in strategic places around the woods. How you ever found them, God only knows. You would throw out my mouthwash, tear up my cigarettes. In the end, I had no choice but to go cold turkey. I was as mad as hell. It was like you had a surveillance system set up in the woods. There was no safe place to hide my cigarettes. Kevin looked at me, giving me a triumphant smile. I guess you could say it was the Bigfoot who helped her kick the habit. So in a way, she was rather like an angel. Wow, what an incredible story. But why did you not want to tell anyone about the Bigfoot? Was it the ridicule that you were worried about? No, not just that. I didn't want anyone to know. I think I felt sorry for them. You see, I saw a lot of programs in pursuit of Bigfoot. I remember thinking, leave them alone, let them be. It annoyed me that people were trying to hunt them down. Looking back, I do not know why I was the one that found my friend's bottle and uncovered his precious secret, but I'm glad I did, for it's not every day you hear a story like this. It would seem that there are angels among us after all. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.